We've got great news as some anti-Second Amendment legislation seems to be dead on arrival for the 2024 legislative session. Let's talk about it. Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel today. That's right, we have some pieces of legislation that are anti-2A that are already dead on arrival for the year 2024. To talk about it, we have brought CRPA's legislative director. He's also the host of Firing Line Radio. You can catch him on Saturdays at 1 o'clock on AM 590, The Answer. That is Rick Travis. Rick, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. And before we get into that, guys, it is working for the new year. The algorithms are in our favor, and we would definitely appreciate it if you hit that like, that share, or that subscribe button. Hit the notification bell so that you get alerted when new videos come out. We're trying to keep you as up to date as possible with all of the legislation that's going to happen in 2024, the 2024 elections, as well as movement in litigation. So, Rick, let's just go ahead and jump right into this here. We have obviously seen some action already in the 2024 legislature. We've seen bills introduced, and we've also seen some bills go down the toilet. A couple of them that we are very happy about. I wanted you to walk us through these, not necessarily just the context of the bill, but if you could describe, especially for AB 851. If you guys didn't know, this was the bill that would have basically made a huge swath of Sacramento in California a gun-free zone. And I mean, where have we heard this before, Rick? Was it the Bruin decision that basically said you couldn't do that? They proposed the bill anyways, but what was the process of defeating this?
So these are our legislative cycle is different from most states in the West. It's a 2-year cycle. Most states, it happens in a year and lasts about 4 to 5 months. We go about 9 months, and then we take a break, and then we come back for another 9 months. So the bills that we're going to talk about today that are dead were not introduced since January, but were introduced last year, made it through to this year. They were going to try to ramp them up and get them through. So what we did last year was we held these up in testimony. We put as much on the board to try to defeat them as we could. They became 2-year bills because they failed deadlines. And then it came for the deadline just a day ago that they had to get these bills in a position to move forward. And they just don't have the votes. They don't have the support for these bills. We were able to whittle that down. And so that is, myself. It's also me working with Sam Prentice, my good ally with Gun Owners of California, and then other groups. Dan from the NRA was in there working on it, and some others, but largely it's been CRPA and GOC leading a group of people in this. But I want to do shout outs to everybody else along the way that's helped out with bills like this. And so it's important to realize that no single person or single group is going to do it, but CRP is definitely leading the way.
Well, that was a pilot program that was being introduced. How about one that had some steam behind it? I'm talking about Senate Bill 8. This has already taken effect in some sense in the city of San Jose. Correct me if I'm wrong there, but this is the proposal for liability insurance that would have caused every gun owner to basically get a firearms policy with homeowners insurance or renters insurance or whatever they have insuring their dwelling. We already know that insurance companies are getting out of California because of all the regulations. This would have been a huge hardship. What was the process like for this one?
Well, part of the process was in testimony, obviously saying that, no one has firearms insurance. We already realized that doesn't exist. The other big pushback was looking at a more global insurance structure here in California, that we have many of our constituents throughout the state, gun owners included, that can't even get fire insurance on their homes anymore. It's just not out there. And if what's offered by the state is pathetic, has an extremely exorbitant amount of money that you're going to be out as, with any insurance, you have a percentage that you're going to have to pay out whenever there's an incident. And that percentage with the state insurance is extravagant, to say the least, which prices a lot of people on. That's why in areas that are near zones that are more prone to fire, you're seeing a lot of homeowners' prices go down because you can't insure the homes. And adding this onto the matrix would do the same thing. It would cause a lot of the already were ready to leave insurance companies to say leave, And it would be grounds. We've seen some insurance companies in the state that if they find out you bought a certain breed of dog, for example, that they're like, yeah, the umbrella policy on your home, that's gone. This part of your policy, that's gone. And that, deductible that might have been $1,500, well, that's now $5,000 because they're just not going to take that on. So you had firearms, and that was one of the things we talked about too. Maybe an insurance company is like, oh, you live in, Alpine County where there's not a lot of people, it's fairly rural. Okay, you only have a deductible of $500. Oh, you live in LA County, that will be $5,500 because insurance plays the odds game. And so that was going to price a lot of people out of their constitutional right, which is what we keep arguing. Plus, the Supreme Court and many other courts across the country have said, yeah, no, you can't do this. But that never stops the left in this state from trying and trying and trying.
And I guess we'll see in the upcoming years, but it is dead for this year. There were a couple others that I guess we can discuss together. We talked about last year when they were initially proposed. These are the two internet-based registries, if you will. You've got Assembly Bill 29, which would see the Department of Justice create an online registry that people would be able to voluntarily go to put themselves on to let other people know that they're not eligible to purchase firearms. You've got AB 1047 also that would encourage people to put their family members and close relatives on a registry so that they would be notified if that person purchased a firearm. If I remember correctly, our discussion really goes beyond this for these two pieces of legislation, right? This is the inch that they try to take for the mile that they try to take later. If these pieces of legislation were to be accepted by the people in Sacramento, it could potentially be something later that they come back and say, well, they didn't mind when it was voluntary, so they shouldn't mind if it's mandatory. These were some big ones in my book. I know that they were really important to you. What was the testimony process like? And I'm also curious, do you see, really any of these bills, but specifically these two, do you see them coming back in future legislative sessions?
Yeah, I think there'll be other runs at it. That's one of the things that the far left does very well is they bring a bill out, they test the waters, they see what happens. They, I think, have a built-in assumption that it's probably going to fail the first 1, 2, 3 times out. But it's also the attitude of the more and more we say things, even if they're absolutely false, people start believing it because we've said enough times and people repeat it. And so that's one of the things we fight. I called Assembly Bill 29 personally the Hotel California bill. And people are like, why would you call it that? Well, in the song, you can come, but you're never going to leave. And that was the same idea behind this. You could voluntarily put yourself on the list, but there was no mechanism of how to get yourself off the list. And if you think about it, I equate it to, you ask somebody who is trying to lose weight, well, do you mind to go on this list? It says you're not going to eat candy. Sure. Because I'm on a diet. I'm not going to eat candy. But the assumption is when you get to your target weight or you get to another point, or maybe you just give up on the diet, that you could go back to eating candy or have a piece of candy or get a box of candy. Yeah, that's not the way this bill worked. This bill was once you put yourself on, you weren't getting out. And it would be part of your permanent record. And so then it could be used against you. Maybe you said yes because a variety of reasons. You thought you could get housing at a college, whatever it might have been. And that's what I'm really worried about with some of these bills too, is they can be tied to things I know you've talked about on the show, like social credit scores and things like that. So it's manipulative. With the firearms purchase notification registry, that was just insane. If you look at socialist countries, communistic countries, fascist countries around the world, there's always been the attitude of leveraging. And that was something Saul Alinsky pushed in his books. Like Rules for Radicals is getting the people around a person to flip on them and basically apply that pressure. And so one of the things that I talked about is a notification registry. This is something the left keeps doing. We want to notify people. A couple of years ago, we had a bill where it's like any classmate you've ever had could say you shouldn't have a firearm. Okay, so people I went to kindergarten with, like a long time ago, people that I was in an online class that never met me, never knew me. Like that just leverages a huge base of people. And you don't know what people are spiteful. There are some people that get over things like, oh, you did better on a test than me. And there's some people that anybody that's lived long enough you bump into and they're like, oh, I never liked you. Why? Because you beat me in sports or you beat me in music or you did this and I couldn't do that. And you're like, really? That was such a small thing. And it was so long ago. But they harbored it. And this allows people to be used as weapons for a political aim and a political goal. So those are the things that we've been testifying. We've been, and the other thing is like, you can take any of the shootings, you can take, the ones we've had down here in Southern California, but none of this would have prevented anything. Had SB8 went through and people had insurance. How does that stop somebody from losing their mind and going in and shooting people up in a dance studio? How does I mean? It's like none of this is designed to do that. It's just designed to go after law-abiding citizens under the false pretense we're stopping stuff that they're not stopping.
Well, yeah, and I know that that's definitely a sentiment within the community, and the way that it ends up manifesting, at least when it comes to communication through CRPA and personal conversations, it almost ends up being a desire for personal accountability, because we end up seeing all of these pieces of legislation come down, taking the freedoms of Californians without necessarily producing the results that they say it would. However, we've got 4 bills here that went from the 23 to the 24 session that are now dead. So you guys, we talked about all 4 of these bills. They are not going for 5 bills that are not going forward for the 2024 session. We may see them soon, but not for the rest of this year. However, Rick, I did want to talk with you about one new bill that was introduced, and I thought it was pretty interesting. It comes, sort of like the gun show legislation that we saw a couple years ago that we are now just having beaten and getting back to gun shows. But it really started at the local level and then appealed to the legislature, and it seems like that's sort of happening here again. I'm talking about Assembly Bill 1869. This is outdoor advertising displays. Can you go ahead and tell us what this bill proposes and what the path is forward for you up in the Capitol?
Sure. So this bill has 2 separate concerns. Concern number 1 is going to be that we have this concept that constitutional concept, by the way, that we are represented by our local leaders at the local level. And as you go up, depending on what the matter is. So like a board of supervisors represents you at a county level, and then your assembly member and state senators represent you at the state level, and then your federal congressional leader or senator is supposed to represent you at that level. At the local level, there has been groups of people that have come with legislative ideas to try to influence public policy. And in the city of Hawthorne, that public policy is really strange. The idea was on a billboard, be it electronic or typical billboard that most people have grown up seeing, which has got different types of paper on it and stuff with an ad, that any advertisement that was tobacco related, adult things related, or firearms would be outlawed. And so there's 2 moves in that bill. One is to start equating in the public's mind that firearms are as bad as smoking, and the public needs to turn on it, and are as bad as adult entertainment. This is something that wouldn't be very spiritual, very of any kind of normal etiquette. And so that's one of the designs, which is, I would argue, to further the concept of the governor of making anybody who owns a firearm to be less than or to be the other in society. The second level of this is, well, when you can't get your local city government and county government to do it, kick it up to the state where there's one representative, in this case, Assemblyman McKinnon, who's going to go to 79 people that really have no skin in the game in Hawthorne to go, yes, because then if they can do it this, then they can start to mirror this bill like we see the attempt with gun shows in each and every community. And then the argument comes, well, this came from the state capitol when you bring it back down, like we saw in San Diego, when Mayor Gloria was like, well, the assembly said we shouldn't have a gun show, so let's start doing this at the city level. Well, they had tried originally at the city level and failed. So the idea was to kick it up so they would have this air of authority that they're just trying to be compliant with state government, when that's not the case at all. It's a total setup. It's a total mislead of the public.
Well, I think that kind of feeds into some of the sentiments that we hold as truths, especially in an election year. And if we can deviate from that for a second, there are these truths that we come back to every 4 years, say in an election year, or every year with the new legislation turning over. For the election year, it tends to be that the political polarization of, say, the mainstream media. You end up, and as much as we wouldn't necessarily want it to be, the firearms community is part of a politicized conversation. I can't tell you how many times I've seen it. I was actually just watching a Colion Noir video the other day where he pulls up a headline that reads, 4 dead in mass shooting. And then when he clicks on the link, what the actual story was about was a drive-by shooting that was gang violence that was done in, I think it was Chicago or something like that. Now, those two things tell two very different stories. A lot of people would probably assert on purpose, especially in a presidential election year. Likewise, another truth that we hold and that we had tried to communicate to people for a long time is that California is a breeding ground for anti-Second Amendment legislation. So I know that you pay attention to this stuff. It's not always stuff that we put out to the public, but do you have any updates from surrounding states, especially while we're coming up with these elections? I think it's important to understand, are they coming up with legislation similar to California? Are we actually exporting this stuff? Are the states toting their perspective political lines? How is Western United States actually shaping up right now?
Well, and I'm glad you brought that up. There's a couple of points I want to make. And I'm not trying to correct you, but I think a lot of our constituents don't understand that we're in a 2-4-6 election cycle. And what I mean by that, there's an election every 2 years. So already, as we're ramping up to vote in here in November for the final part of a presidential election, the gubernatorial election has already started. Candidates are already declared and are running, and that's in 26. So that's literally, we're like 2.5 years from that point. And then there's the presidential will follow that. And then there's kind of a little softer, but it's not soft in the terms of California overturning. But in 26, it's every sheriff's office except San Francisco. They're in the odd year. And, the governor, lieutenant governor, et cetera. So we're always in an election cycle. The second part of that is, a lot of people, and I know you've heard this, Kevin, are like, I'm out of California because, I'm just tired of fighting this crud and I'm going to go. And I get it. I get the sentiment. We monitor, because we work very closely with the Second Amendment Law Center. We monitor on our legislative team all of the Western United States. That's all the members of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, and that will make common sense to everybody else, as well as the other states. So just go Texas, north, and then take that west. That's what we monitor. And we do have some stuff that has come up, when people are told all the time, here's what's happening. We have good news. Alaska came out with called the Safe Schools Act, which I wish the rest of the Western US would do, which mandates have passed that any CCW holder on staff at a elementary, like K through 12 school, is to carry their firearm at school to be a deterrent and a first line of defense, because they realize by the time, state troopers and law enforcement can get there, bad things are already happening. And so that first line of defense is internal. And I think this is an amazing piece of legislation. And I think when people sit there and go, well, what if an accident happened? Could an accident happen? Sure, an accident can happen anywhere. Is it likely to happen? No, because if you look at the stats of CCW holders, they're the least likely to have an accident nationwide. When you look to New Mexico, New Mexico has the huge Alec Baldwin Rust case going in. He's being indicted. But at the same time, they have two bills, a House Bill 129 and House Bill 137. 29 is a 14-day waiting period. Oh, where do we know that kind of an idea from? But it's extending it 4 more days out. And you have 137, which is not just what they wanted to do was get around the assault weapons ban, Kevin. So they're forcing registration on every semi-automatic gas-operated firearm. So that includes your Glocks, your SIGs, your Colts, any pistol falls into that thing. Any shotgun that is a semi-automatic shotgun falls into that thing. So this is even a bigger grab, and they're trying to sell it to people as like, well, we're not going after assault weapons. No, they're going after everything that is not either single action or double action or pump. So and then you can go to Washington north of us, and this is starting to get to be a very scary alliance between the governors of Washington, Oregon, and California. And so, we had AB 28, which was our 11% excise tax that goes into effect July 1st. Here in this state, it's almost word for word, pull out where it said California, insert Washington, same lies, same everything, is now House Bill 2238, which is taken off. And the mantra in Washington amongst the legislators was, well, California did it, why wouldn't we? And we're seeing that bill now being pushed and being ready to be introduced, because there's some states that won't reconvene till next January, but it's already up on the books. There's already legislators ready to roll with it. We have 1902 in Washington that will require a firearms permit to own firearms. You have to get like a second license in addition to your driver's license, and the two will be attached, and all sorts of issues with that. And that is something that if it gets passed in Washington, I guarantee you we're going to see it probably next year be attempted here. We also have Senate Bill 5444, which is basically our SB2. Again, just pull out California, put in Washington, and they're trying to run it. And then they have the one firearm every 30 days. I wonder where they got that from. That's also being ran up there. And the idea of removing preemption. Preemption is something that the late H.L. Richardson, who was a state senator, was Sam Paredes of Governors of California's father-in-law, fought very hard to get in here. And what preemption does is local cities aren't allowed to go after constitutional practices like the Second Amendment. That has to be done at the state level. But what there is an attempt to do in California, Oregon, and Washington is to remove that preemption so that any local community can do whatever they want against the Constitution.
Well, geez, I guess for those who are planning to move out of the state to get away from the legislation, perhaps they're going to have to make sure that they get more than a third of the way across the country to actually do it. Hopefully, a lot of that legislation doesn't end up passing, but it is concerning that this sort of legislation does seem to be copied by some of the states within the Ninth Circuit. I guess overall, what are your thoughts moving forward? We got new legislation. We've got Western states kind of doing all that. Any final thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think one of the things people have to realize is you've got to fight it here, the politics here. And here's why. The left is not staying in California. They get their taxes driven up. But if you look, a lot of the biggest proponents on the left, movie stars, bankers, tech firms, taxes have gone too high under Gavin Newsom. So what they've done, they've pulled up their roots and they've moved to Idaho, Texas, these other places. And once they get there, they're like, hey, there's some things they don't do right here. So I've got money. I'm going to make that happen. And so they do all sorts of crazy different antics. And so now you're seeing places like Austin that I would argue has already turned completely blue. In Texas, you got places in Idaho like Coeur d'Alene that has turned blue, places in Utah that are at least arguably pink, if not blue. So you have this shift, and that shift is because you can't run. You have to stand your ground. And I keep telling people during these election cycles, when people complain to me and say, Rick, I shouldn't have to fight for my Second Amendment rights, I look at them and say, there's nothing more American than fighting for your Second Amendment rights. When our first government, Great Britain, they taxed us, they put soldiers in our homes, they had a massacre in Boston, they had a bunch of different things. We never raised arms up against them until they came for our guns and our ammo. And then it was game on, and the revolution started, and we had a new name for us, Americans, those of us that fought our government, Great Britain. I'm not advocating when I say this of like rise up and fight. No, that's not my message. My message is for 250 years, and that's this year, 250 years, we have been fighting our government on gun control issues. And it's like Jefferson said, every generation, it's our turn. This is our turn. And so folks, don't complain and get engaged, get involved. And I think the chapter program that you run, Kevin, is a great way for them to do that, as well as following this channel and making sure they're engaged in the materials on our website.
Well, yeah, I mean, we're definitely trying to put up that resistance. We're definitely trying to get the message out so that the appropriate people can get elected into office, so that we don't have to deal with bills like this anymore. However, for the time being, we did get those 5 bills defeated. We're going to continue fighting this legislation. Rick, I want to thank you for taking the time being with us today.
Thank you.
And guys, if you like videos and content like these, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Hit the notification bell so that you get notified when we come out with these new videos. It may be an update with legislation. It may be an update with a lawsuit. Either way, you're going to be updated as quickly as possible. I want to thank you again, guys. We'll see you on the next one.